All right, so real quick, before I introduce you to myself and Andy and Mike and Megan, y'all, please raise your hand if you have read the actual document of the Cyber Resilience Act. Like, have you read it? Okay. All right. Who has read the term product with digital elements at least 345 times? Okay. This is like some real reading we've done here. Okay. All right. My name is Eddie Knight. I am here hanging out with absolutely no relation to Megan Knight on the other side over here. We are not related, have never been related, will never be related.
True statement.
But on that note, Megan, do you want to introduce yourself first? Just a quick snippet about why anybody cares to hear from you.
Test. Hello. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Megan Knight. Again, no relation to Eddie Knight. Don't take that personally at all. I'm the Director of Software Communities at ARM, and I sit on a bunch of boards across various Linux Foundation projects. And I also run the Global Cyber Policy Work Group with OpenSSF, where we talk about the CRA every single week.
I'm Mike Lieberman. I'm CTO and co-founder of Kusari. We do software supply chain security stuff. I also do a whole lot of work in the OpenSSF, where I'm a technical advisory council member and governing board member. I maintain a bunch of different projects, including Guac and Salsa. And I'm also involved in the CNCF as a tech lead for tag security and compliance now. And also, I think I've been informed to say I am not a lawyer.
That's correct. None of us are lawyers. Please, for the recording, none of us are lawyers.
And we like to sound authoritative, but we will never give you advice, especially not on this topic.
It's medical advice for your own health, yes. Hi, I'm Andy, CEO and founder at ControlPlane. We are cloud-native cyber services for regulated industries. I've worked in tag security, authoring various papers there, and a little bit of OSSF contribution, but certainly not as much as the luminaries on the panel with me, which is a Teflon-shouldered, slopey way of starting. And over to you, Eddie.
All right, Eddie Knight. I work for Sonatype. I'm in the OSPO there, OSPO adjacent to Megan. That is the only thing that we have in relation with each other. Thank you. Okay, all right. So I work at Sonatype, and in my role, I am chair of the Technical Oversight Committee for FINOS, which is the financial services arm of the Linux Foundation. I took the mantle from Andy in tag security, which is now tag security and compliance. I'm hanging out over there, and been hanging out over in the OpenSSF doing things like work on the baseline, which several folks here are part of. So the reason that a lot of us were highlighting our different roles that we have across open source is that has put us in a position where we are needing to stay up to speed with and learn about as pseudo amateurs, some of us less than others, on just like what is going on with the CRA, how is it impacting us as maintainers, how is it impacting our organizations, how is it impacting the foundations, right, as stewards. And so that's a lot of the stuff that all of us have gotten roped into somewhat unwillingly at times. Mike, could you seed us with a little bit of a question to kind of kick off the conversation here?
Sure, yeah. I think probably, given that we are talking about how the CRA is relating to open source, like who are the actors that are kind of the big actors as far as in relation to sort of open source and the CRA?
Well, this should be no surprise for those of you that read the document, but we've got some manufacturers in the mix, right? And even some that wouldn't have been traditionally considered manufacturers. My experience is a lot in IoT and embedded spaces. It's pretty easy to see if you've got a physical product, right, that you are a manufacturer. The CRA defines manufacturing differently, as it includes products with digital elements. So traditional software companies that may have never considered themselves a manufacturer now get to be deemed a manufacturer. So that's the one I'll take. Mike, you want to talk about one?
Sure. Given that I maintain a lot of open source projects, maintainers are also sort of under the CRA. So those are folks who write the code, maintain the open source projects as well. And luckily, sort of over the past year, past several months, a lot of the fear, uncertainty, and doubt around maintainers has begun to settle a little bit, where, hey, if you are not providing a product with digital elements, so that means, hey, you are providing, you have an open source project, it's a hobby open source project, et cetera. You have very few requirements underneath the CRA, as opposed to the worry in the past, which was, great, now I'm going to be required by the EU to do free labor for, massive organizations.
We support the CNCF Flux project, and so we are a maintainer of open source software. And in an attempt to preempt the risk coming with being on the wrong side of legislation, that we're not entirely sure how best it can be interpreted, we are using some of the OpenSSF technologies like Scorecard and the Baseline project in order to build out self-attestations. So is Flux passing the CI/CD best practices? Is it generating SBOMs? Does it have build metadata and attestations? Are they packaged and distributed? So thanks for all the work that's been going on there. We have de-risked where we see ourselves, and these are just good practices. We hope that this is sufficiently sufficient.
Yeah. And Eddie, would you like to talk about the last set of actors that we know about?
So you talked a little bit about manufacturers, right? You drilled in to talk about life as a manufacturer. You talked a little bit about maintainers. So there's two left. So we've got the big three are our maintainers, stewards, manufacturers, and the one that very few people are affected by, but over at Sonatype we are affected as distributors. So we've got kind of four. Big three are the ones that are highly populated. The stewards we haven't talked about yet. Linux Foundation is a steward, CNCF is a steward, OpenSSF is a steward. There's certain responsibilities that a steward has that are kind of in between that of a maintainer and a manufacturer. What's the term they use? A light touch, highly custom regulatory regime? Is that what they call it?
Really, security by design best practices that your project should maybe already have implemented. There's no real direct burden to you other than asking you to make your project more stable and secure.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's worth highlighting there, right, is, hey, if you have a project underneath the Linux Foundation and there's lots of folks who all compete with each other in the markets, but they're all coming together to collaborate with the Linux Foundation, hey, can we all kind of come together to sort this stuff out? Or do we all want to spend a ton of money doing it all individually? That's kind of where the stewards can come in and help out a lot.
Megan, what is the topic that has been confusing so many people and is still not locked in yet? And because it's so confusing and so not locked in, you made us promise not to talk about it.
Is this, well, there's several areas here that are still under discussion and open comment periods. One particularly being the definition of a steward and whether you're self-opting as a steward or not. There's a lot of debate on whether you have the freedom to do that, what pushes you into the classification of a steward, and honestly what that means. I think steward, because it's a new term for us folks, it seems like it's a scary or a daunting thing. Honestly, it's not that bad. I think it seems a lot more scary at the outset. Mike Brissell, sitting here, actually did write a blog for the OpenSSF on, so you think you're a steward, are you sure? And it's on the OpenSSF website. I would encourage you to check that out. But we've got confirmation from our EU government liaison that said that there should be more clarification on that topic coming by the end of the year, so that it's a bit more clear to understand, for example, Zephyr is considering themselves, Zephyr Project, a Linux Foundation project, they are considering themselves a steward. They're taking that responsibility on. Now, again, what does that responsibility mean? There's no legal burden. There's no legal burden to stewards. So, sure, make yourself a steward. There are policies and things that you need to have set up. But again, it's like, hey, do you have a way for a manufacturer to reach out to you and let them know that they've discovered a bug? It's not saying that you have to go fix that bug. In fact, the manufacturer is the one that has to submit their patch upstream. Also, you get a choice on whether or not you actually merge that patch or not. So hopefully that means we're getting awesome free work from manufacturers that are actually stepping up and helping solve your CVEs. That'd be super cool, which would be a total inverse of how we thought this thing was going to go.
A lot of people are laughing at that.
Yeah, it'd be super,
I don't know
super
why
cool,
that was
right?
funny.
I have no clue. But yeah, so I know that that's a hotly debated topic. I had a gentleman get very passionate about the subject yesterday, and I think that's actually a really good thing. Policy is usually quite dull, and so I think that any opportunity for us to be jazzed up about it and actually have an in-person conversation that results in disagreement is an opportunity for clarification. So hopefully we'll get much more clarity on the steward topic once we get to December.
All right, cool. So now that we talked a little bit about, what the CRA is, sort of the current understanding of what sort of obligations are, it's probably worthwhile kind of chatting about, like, how is the Linux Foundation, whether it's in its role as a steward or, just sort of generally helping folks with complying to the CRA, helping out maintainers understand that what their obligations are and all that.
I only see this from being without or outside the working groups from the downstream effects. So having worked with people on this panel in order to look at what we're doing for Flux, it is really taking the downstream of the OpenSSF tooling that's been put in place over the last few years, and happily, to the point about secure by design, we should be doing this already. This tooling was put in place not with this specific intention. Correct me if I'm wrong. It was about how do we raise the bar for open source? How do we make sure that we are robustified and hardened against supply chain attacks, against insecure build, against the SALSA levels, these kind of things. And so when the question came, well, how do we actually increase confidence and cryptographically sign it with a root of trust that comes back from the producer or the manufacturer, in this case, then it was a case of, well, we're actually doing all right with the adoption of some of these tools. So from my perspective, sort of being a third order effect of central Linux Foundation governance, if you like, or advisory, then it's consuming the OpenSSF tooling that's got us to where we are with some level of confidence.
I think there's a couple other places that we are developing that in tandem with the baseline, orbit, all those things. I'm hoping you all will speak to those more. I'll speak to the Global Cyber Policy Work Group at OpenSSF. We had a Stewards and Manufacturers workshop last December. To be honest, I thought that was a super bizarre name for an event, but I went because I was like, well, I think I'm one of those things. And it turns out I'm both. So it was really a good thing to be there. And what we discovered is that there are several work streams that really need to help eliminate the points of differentiation in products for folks to help navigate this. You all are going to have enough of your own specific lawyer-driven risk compliance stuff to worry about in your products. So let us help you by making some tools that we can all contribute to and get a 10 times effort out of, right? So those work streams are awareness, tooling, and standards. How can we create standards that will help, rule things out for us? How will we create tooling that will allow ease of access in ingesting SBOMs or interpreting SBOMs? And how can compliance actually read those so that they stop bothering maintainers and developers with silly questions that they don't want to answer? And then awareness is how do we baseline knowledge of the CRA and help spread awareness of what it is and how to set yourself up before you get a big fine from the government. So I head that up, and we chat every 2 weeks in a call. We'd love to see you all there. And we have manufacturers and stewards giving presentations on their specific implementation efforts on those calls. So we've already had talks from Dell who talked about their specific implementations of the CRA and how they're affecting their product lines and things like that. So if you've got a story to share, we'd love to talk about it. If you've got questions specific to your type of manufacturing or stewardship, please bring them because we only are able to ask the EU government and be able to provide open comment, advocating for you all if we know that that's a question, gray area, or issue that you're experiencing. It's a very unique space where we're all at right now. So from that side, please come join us.
All right, you're looking at me. So somewhat separate, inspired by the Cyber Policy Working Group, we've been looking at different ways that we can create control catalog, create some tooling, create resources for maintainers to elevate their projects, right? maintainers have no obligations, but maintainers are incentivized to make it easier for everybody else to use their projects. And so that's where we're wanting to come in as maintainers to kind of create a standard, standard is the wrong word, create a control catalog that can kind of define what good is. And this is not necessarily a pursuit of CRA compliance, but really a pursuit of goodness. And what we found when Probe from the OpenSSF went through and compared the CRA to what our community of Mad Hatters thought was good security practice for an open source project, found that we were able to get 19 out of 21 of the big points covered. It does not address like the PDE assessment, conformity assessments, that kind of stuff. But we are able to just really drill in and say, if you're an open source project, here's a control catalog that you should follow. The first one is make sure MFA is turned on for your contributors. Like if you're a maintainer with admin access, turn on MFA. Who would have thought? If that's surprising to you, talk to the person next to you for why that you should. So that's the control catalog, and we've been working on support. And actually, Ben, just stand up. If you guys want to talk more about the control catalog, Ben is the lead maintainer for the baseline control catalog. He can answer every one of your questions. We're also supporting any tooling efforts that are coming out of that. So there's a few different projects in the OpenSSF. Scorecard, Minder is focused on GitHub support, and a few other things. Our integration with LFX, the Linux Foundation's LFX Insights platform is another effort that we're working on supporting, because we want to make sure that as we define this control catalog, it's easy for other people to automate this, look at your repo, see where you compare. And the goal is downstream, all of the folks who are sitting around talking about how much this thing hurts can have an authoritative answer to like, where are these projects sitting? That's the goal that we're trying to address there.
Yeah, and I think an analogy that has worked pretty well lately has been folks, like remember, hey, the early days of open source, right? And early days of sort of a lot of the tools that we all take for granted today, right? If we go back decades, a lot of code was copy pasted, a lot of, people might be following reasonable practices, but they weren't really standardized. People weren't following common best practices. And, where, still today we have problems with like CNC++ and package managers and those sorts of things. Whereas like the way I sort of view baseline and the tooling around it is like, hey, this is like bringing package managers to open source itself, where now folks are being told like, hey, you can go do whatever you want, but if we kind of come together and start to share tooling, start to follow the controls and follow best practices around them of like, hey, if we are all start to follow Salsa, if we all start to, or just a lot of us start to follow Salsa and other common things, then hey, we don't have to all be speaking different languages, tools can interoperate better and all that good stuff.
Can we do a quick time check for everybody that's listening? How much time do we have left from this point to the end? 20 minutes, 22 minutes. Could we take one audience question and then hop in after Andy speaks his thought on that last question?
By all means, let's risk it.
All right. Do you have thoughts on the last question?
I was going to move on.
Okay. All right. We're going to take, does anybody have one question that you'd like to ask as a sort of like little halfway marker for us? Oh, no. Mike's too excited. All right. Anybody but Mike Bursell? Want to hop in? Doesn't need to be a good question. Could be a naive question. Could be, okay, here we go.
Please be gentle.
No, I was actually interested when you were talking about the different classifications, with manufacturers and stewards. You mentioned distributors, and I'm kind of curious about that aspect of it because of where my company kind of inserts in the hierarchy of it. So.
Okay. Yeah. So I mentioned my company, Sonatype. And did I use the right word? Distributor, right? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I'm so glad we have Mike Bursell here. Probably should be having my seat. So Sonatype, we manage the Java package repository, right? So Maven Central is something that we manage, and there is a lot of concern. Like internal meetings had when there were the first iteration of the CRA. was not looking like it would be good for folks like us. There is a legitimate conversation around whether we would be able to continue distributing Java packages to Europe. Like, we had to have that conversation. It scaled back a lot. The responsibility that's being held for like repository managers, people whose only role in the ecosystem is to let you post your software, and then we make it available to other people. The responsibility on that role is a lot lower. If you feel like that describes you, you should go look at it, read it a little bit more. But I don't think you're going to be upset with where it landed on that point.
And also, please ask your lawyer.
Right, speaking of languages, but morphing slightly into linguistics, I'm also CISO of OpenUK. Very sadly, our CEO, Amanda Brock, couldn't be here today. So from a British or UK perspective, we are very close to the European Union in many ways, and so we're kind of under that umbrella. But speaking more internationally, how have other countries looked to approach the CRA with equivalent local or related legislation?
Yes, I can obviously only speak to, the conversations I've had. Obviously different companies will all be doing different things, but the thing that I found kind of interesting in some of the conversations I've had is I was speaking to a gentleman from Japan at KubeCon Europe, where he said, oh, we are having monthly workshops on the CRA. I talked to somebody else from South Korea, same sort of thing. Obviously Europe is very well aware. And then, of course, maybe not so surprising, some of my folks, my friends in the US, their thing is, oh, I figured like a lawyer would sort it out and, I don't actually have to do anything. And then when I have described it as, hey, this is probably going to be more similar to things like GDPR, they go pale and they go, oh, I need to start talking to some folks. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of folks out there who are, doing the right things, they're attending the right meetings, and then there's maybe some other folks who maybe need a little bit of a kick in the pants to, really make sure that they're starting to address this, that they are talking to their lawyers about, hey, what are my obligations? Because it sounds like this is not something I could just litigate away. It's going to be something that I will have requirements to implement.
And Japan shipped SBOM legislation, if I understand correctly.
Yes. The exact details,
If anyone here can represent this, then we're all at sea here. But yeah, I understand it was the first country internationally to introduce an SBOM mandate for software. Whether they preempted something they saw coming or had enlightened leadership, we don't know. Right.
Well, thanks for telling us anyway.
Halfway to a useful statement. Right, as a maintainer then, what do you think the biggest challenges are for organizations that are looking to package and distribute software, ensuring compliance and cryptographically or proving it in some way, without any legal advice, please?
I mean, I think the most difficult thing is which parts of this apply to me, right? That's the number one question that everybody's been having. That's the number one, like that's the biggest one.
And also, if you want enterprises to continue to use your project, how do you balance their needs with your bandwidth? So I think, we've been talking about maintainer burnout for a few years now. I'm almost burnt out from talking about it. But I fear that from what we're hearing that we are going to see a new wave coming. I don't know, a bunch of you sitting in the room may have gotten a weird email from NASA a few years ago where their compliance expert was trying to go through and figure out their, their open source packages and what were those up to. They didn't have a background in technology, so a lot of the questions were like, where's your open source project located? Right? And so that was super cool to try and figure out, right? But it's also super cool to find out that NASA's using your open source project. So, we got to meet in the middle on this. So one of the things we're working on in the OpenSSF policy work group is kind of working on this compliance.md file that will hopefully provide answers to a lot of just like very baseline questions that projects can put out there and just send a link. If you get a weird NASA email, you just send a link. And if they don't know how to use GitHub, that sounds like a Google that they can figure figure out. But at least that sets up the maintainers to not have to answer individual inquiries from every single compliance officer, because we know that that is coming and that the level of education and experience is very different from how you would maybe speak to another developer or maintainer.
Yeah, totally agree with everything said there, and I think the key bit that I think is probably worth highlighting is, hey, also various companies, if you notice that, like, most likely a lot of those compliance folks used to be talking to your OSPOs to do a lot of this stuff, and a lot of companies over the past year have been laying off their OSPOs, and I think they're going to be also in for a very rude surprise when they're like caught not knowing what's going on and being super surprised, and it's like, yeah, this is the thing that your OSPO used to do.
What do you think, Andy?
I concur entirely. So what do we think are the biggest challenges? We've got issues with end-of-life applications and support burdens that are being discussed at the moment. How, as an open source maintainer, if I'm supporting an API that gets deprecated, what do I have to do for my SDK?
I'm pretty sure this was on the list of things Megan made us promise not to talk about.
100%.
Yeah, it was.
So it is currently being discussed.
Yeah. So, but this is actually really fun, so I give Megan a hard time. But there's a lot of this that's just really open, and some of us are reading this text and we're looking at the words and we're sending screenshots to each other and saying, do you understand what this is saying? And it's like, oh no, you're not supposed to look at the main document. And it's like, oh.
Yeah.
But I think this is one of those answers that y'all are not going to like, which is we need to wait for litigation. We need to wait for cases to get taken to court, and we need the precedents to be set, and then we'll know if we're doing it right or not. That's real scary, and I totally get that, and the fines are really big, and your risk and compliance officers are really not going to like that. But sadly, it is just the nature of a very complex document, and we're all going to have to get comfortable with being wrong, politely.
Yeah, that's, for example, as somebody who is a co-founder and an executive at a startup, that scares me, right? That is why I am talking to my lawyers on a regular basis. And of course, my lawyers are like, we do US law, you gotta find a European lawyer. Oh, great, okay. But with that said, I think one of the things that makes, to tie it back to sort of the open source and what the Linux Foundation is doing, right, is I do think with things like Baseline, like the cyber policy working groups, it's lowering the burden on folks like myself to kind of get educated to know what to do. Because again, I think folks who are coming in with no knowledge and they're like learning about what CRA is for the first time today, hey, you still got some time. Not a lot, but you still got time to now get ahead of it, start talking to the folks you need to talk to, start perhaps working with the Linux Foundation to understand, like, hey, can I help out with the baseline stuff? Because I'd much rather we all worked on this together and we had, we got a lot of stuff done than to sort of, again, be caught where, hey, yeah, a giant multinational corporation has the time and the resources and the legal teams to sort of figure this out. A lot of smaller companies don't.
That's right. And LF Research produced a paper maybe about 6 months ago. They featured 4 Linux Foundation projects, a Yocto project, Zephyr project, a civil infrastructure platform, and OpenSSF as being kind of the golden children of the Linux Foundation in terms of CRA readiness. How we are specifically CRA ready, meaning I represent Yocto project and Zephyr project as a board member, so apologies there. But by we, if you want to learn more about how those projects are specifically CRA compliant, whether you're using them already or they've been a decision to use them in the past, this might be a tipping point for you. And so you can go out to LF Research, the website there, and download the paper. It's completely free. You don't have to provide your email, and the information's available to you.
Yeah, so I think I'll ask an open-ended one here. Again, it's going to be highly speculative, but where would folks like to see open source post-CRA? Like, what are the things that you want to see come out of this in making sort of everybody happier?
stable CVE management. I want to see more people care about this, and I want to see more manufacturers stepping up for general project maintenance. They're getting such a benefit by getting to use it already, and I really hate when my projects have one or two major enterprises that are doing the majority of the project maintenance. They're spending the same amount as the other members, and some companies aren't members at all, and they're getting the benefit of their maintenance. It's not sexy work, but that's what keeps the lights on, and I really want to see more of that. I'm hoping the security initiatives will force more companies to be involved.
Yeah. Yeah. For those listening from home, there was a lot of applause after that. Go ahead.
And from my perspective, we do the same work for organizations again and again. The CV backlog burn down. Everyone's collecting them. We've had new CV numbering authorities added, or naming authorities added in the last few years. GitHub will release a CV for every bug. Sorry, the Linux kernel will release a CV for every bug, because it might have a security side effect. Now, that's a defensive way of approaching the landscape, but it does mean managing those CVEs. Well, what is the actual effective remediation? Well, first of all, is the CV actually applicable to the application it's being used in? If there is an OpenSSL CVE in a hashing library that's 30 years old and it's not being called by your application, well, why are you subject to that CVE? Because there's very basic correlation going on between the package version and the CVE identifier for that package. One of the ways around that is to go hardcore symbolic execution. My application is not using the call graph that hits over there. There's also far easier ways of doing it. You can self-attest to it. If it's interpreted code, you can just excise that, cut that out, sort of tree shake the functions, if you like. But then, in order to get that passing a scanner, you have to issue a VEX document, which is Vulnerability Exploitability Exchange. That says, for this package and that dependency bundled up in it, I am not vulnerable. Here's a signed attestation. Boom. That work is done in isolation. That vulnerability triage happens inside every major organization if they're using VEX, or else there's an exemption list, or else developers are getting browbeaten to patch these things on a cadence that may actually be impossible. One of my favorites is SQLite. It has vulnerabilities that are context dependent, especially in Chrome, that when you're deploying inside a container have no bearing on the production or the runtime of the thing. So a centralization of effort around VEX applicability, or an easier way to actually do that work, issue it. You've got a secondary problem, which is where do you trust the VEX from? Probably only the repo that's generated it. What happens if they get that wrong? There are trust issues. This almost goes back to PKI. What's the revocation list for VEX? These are not solved questions. But that repeated work on vulnerability assessment, which now translates into remediation guarantees, is something I'd love to see done if everyone's got any spare time.
And that's why we pay Andy the big bucks. But that being said, actually, so your question was like, where should we be post CRA, right? Like,
Yeah, where would you like to see open source post CRA?
And I think that Megan's point and y'all's points are really, really big in saying that the ideal state is that every company is assuming an equitable share of responsibility for the open source, right? And this isn't just feature additions, right? Because historically, feature additions come at the cost of security improvements. It's usually a trade-off because we can only work on one thing at a time. But if we had a more equitable share of maintenance of the open source, this is idealism at its peak, right? We're always like, if everybody would participate, right? But that's not the world we live in. We might be at a tipping point where we're no longer having firms with less than 500 people that are carrying the bulk of security improvements for the global cloud providers and everybody else, right? Like, the smallest firms in the world are historically the ones who are securing the software the most at expense to themselves. And that's a huge problem that I think maybe we're getting close to seeing a culture shift on.
Yeah, I think to build on top of that, what I'll say is like, hey, for me, 1,000%, right? Because if we can kind of make things more equitable, hey, smaller companies can thrive as well, as opposed to just the hyperscalers of the world. But in addition to that, I think one of the things that this also really helps out is like, hey, if I'm a consumer, most folks, when they talk about consuming open source, they're not like, sure, there might be some folks who are like, yeah, I just want to consume open source. I don't care about security. I don't care about anything. There's probably those folks out there. But most folks do care, but they're often taken by surprise. And what I think stuff like Baseline and the CRA is going to say is like, no, you can't let yourself be taken by surprise anymore. You are responsible for this. So if you pull in some random, library that, hey, it hasn't been maintained in 3 years, that's on you. Like, that is very much on you and your company to handle that. But what I think stuff like Baseline helps out with is it helps answer the question of what are those expectations? What are the things that those open source providers are telling about their project? Because a lot of times, like, I look at projects, and if that project told me, hey, this is best effort, do not come to me for support, do not ask me about any of this stuff. Like, if you want to use my code, great. If you don't want to use it, great. I'm not providing anything. Awesome, I can make that risk calculation. Do I want to take that in and do stuff with it? And I think that helps out. And then on the other side, as a maintainer, I can say that and now not have to really worry about like getting a threatening legal letter from a massive enterprise saying, hey, you have a CVE, you need to fix this for me because you're a provider.
Yeah. Do we have time for a question? Who's keeping time? We are clearly not. All right. Got a hand there, got a hand there. All right, I'm going to go to the closest one and then back.
You mentioned Baseline a couple of times now. What is it?
Oh, so Eddie mentioned it earlier. It's a set of control requirements, that essentially is like a set of requirements for how to have a baseline of security for your project. And it's really about the hygiene of the project itself more than necessarily like, yes, is the code good? It's more of like, are you doing multi-factor authentication for the repo? Do you have a security policy, right? Because that's one of the key things there.
It's a checklist. It gives you a score. You want high number.
It's not a score, not a score.
Buzzword alert. We do not say score around here.
Scorecard. Scorecard and baseline are two different things, and these people know much more about them than me, if we can't tell. Eddie, what's that back question?
So you mentioned that you had some uncertainty about what you had to do under the CRA. Are you hoping that the harmonized standard will answer all those questions, or do you think there will still be quite a bit of doubt there?
Oh my, that's a great question. I love the word harmonized, and I'd love to see more of that happening. That's the key point there. I think that from what I gather, the standards are not necessarily requirements, and so I think they're only going to work as well as we choose to adopt them. So if they're written well and they benefit us in the ecosystem, then that's great. I would love to talk more about that with Etsy and Senelak and some of those that are actually working on the harmonized standards to kind of understand better where they are at. I am understanding that they're still taking feedback on those things. There's actually a happy hour with the Etsy, the external Etsy-facing folks here. There's more information I can provide to you after this. If that's something that interests you, they will have much more information on that. Just given that Etsy is a member-based organization, they kind of keep everything very behind closed doors, and it's going to be a grand reveal of a surprise. So.
Any other questions? Okay. Oh, man. I might as well just stay down here and hang out with you guys. You don't get dibs. All right. Who else raised their hands?
It's me. I'm one of those guys who learned about this very morning. Full disclosure here. And as a system engineer, looking forward for my fellow developers to know about this, if you, for example, use a random NPM library that you might have about certain scandals in the past, recent past, what is the position of that hobbyist programmer in regards of this current regulation? It's like, yeah, I'm doing this in my spare time, but how the internet is using this library? What's the position for that person?
Yeah, so maintainers should have no legal liability, but they're heavily encouraged to make that well known that like, hey, this is a hobbyist project. Do not contact me about CRA-related, compliance. Like, if you want to go do that, and also if you are, for example, interested in saying, hey, we'd love to talk with folks who maybe want to become maintainers, great.
Yeah. So there is some safety that you could do there by.
Also, if it's being used in production or not is key. If you say explicitly that this is not to be used in prod, that will also help kind of protect you a bit.
You guys were talking about the ideal world of manufacturers like pushing back the fixes. Do you know if there's any legislation or enforcing action that can happen on that, or even maybe from the open source part that they enforce it back to the manufacturer that they must commit the fixes? Because you will see in their ENISA database, they will report the vulnerability anyway. So also the open source part would actually know that there's a vulnerability.
That's a tricky question. I am not certain what that would look like. I think that would be a lot of work on the open source side to go out to the manufacturers since they don't have that obligation. But there could be work kind of paralleling each other and that the manufacturer is working on it and somebody within the project is already working on it as well. The burden lies with the manufacturer, and they have a clock that starts ticking when they have a security vulnerability. So they are time-wise more incentivized to work on that more quickly maybe than a project would. Again, it might not be a great fix. It might not be a great patch. It might not be how the project would have wanted to patch it, and therefore they don't have to accept it. But I'm not sure if the burden should be put on the project itself to go back out to the manufacturers and request that work, because it could also be work that you are not willing to accept.
But real quickly, but manufacturers do have to submit that back upstream.
They do have to submit it upstream. It is not the project's responsibility to take it, though. They can decide whether or not they want to take it.
All right. Okay, I think we're at time here.
Sorry, John, you didn't get to ask your question because I rejected you.
Yeah.
All right, this was super freaking cool. Megan, Mike, Andy, this was awesome. I'm Eddie. If you guys want to talk more, we're here all week.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.